Welcome to my 267th video on my work with OO gauge. This video will feature a 3-rail kit-built model of a Midland 2P440 tender locomotive that I bought on eBay. The usual, a bit of background history, a look at the new model with some necessary servicing and repair, and some running video on my Hornby Dublo 3-rail tabletop. The locomotive class represented by this model can't be considered at all obscure. The 440 tender engines that the LMS inherited from the Midland Railway and subsequently built itself in considerable numbers have been very well represented as ready-to-run OO gauge models. Both the 4P compound 440 and the simpler 2P variant have been available for decades, from Dapol, Hornby and Bachmann, and I may be forgetting a branding. The history of the classes is a wee bit complicated if you get down into the details. A large number of these 440 locos stemming from the Midland designs were built, and examples were also rebuilt during their operating life with different sized driving wheels, cylinders, etc. Many of the original Midland builds were also classed as rebuilds of earlier engines dating back to the 19th century, but it seems that these were mostly paper rebuilds, classified as rebuilds for accounting purposes, since rebuilding and new builds get charged to different accounting streams. Although all of these 440 engines can possibly be broken down into several subclasses, there were really two major types: the 4P compound with one internal high-pressure cylinder and two external low-pressure cylinders, as against the simple 2P with just two internal cylinders. Here you can see examples of the 2P at top left and the 4P at bottom right, both shown here in Midland Railway's crimson livery from contemporary postcards. So if you see external cylinders and valve gear, it's a 4P. No externals and valve gear, it's a 2P. Engines of this type were favoured for passenger work by the Midland with its small engine policy, and they continued to be very useful engines for the LMS, although they weren't powerful enough for large expresses that had to deal with significant gradients. The Midland Railway built 45 4P compounds before grouping in 1923, and the LMS went on to build another 195 with only minor changes to the design, slightly smaller driving wheels, for example. The Midland Railway built 165 2P 440 engines as Class 483, nominally rebuilds of earlier Johnson engines. The LMS went on to build another 138 2P 440s. Most of these 440 locos passed on to British Railways service upon nationalisation in 1948, other than a couple that were withdrawn due to accident, damage, etc. They were withdrawn in the 1950s. I believe that all of the LMS-built engines were scrapped, and the only survivor in preservation is the Midland 4P compound, originally numbered 1000, as seen here. Here's my new model on the workbench. The LMS number 383 would make this one of the earliest members of the Midland 483 class, built somewhere back around 1911 originally. It may have been rebuilt at some point with larger cylinders and wheels, I'm not clear on that. As mentioned, it isn't hard to find OO gauge models of the 2P, but those models were all made for 2-rail running, and I have examples. This kit-built model was set up for 3-rail running, making it of special interest to me. No model of the Midland LMS 440s was generally available for 3-rail running. Actually, I believe Trix had a sort of approximation, but it was one of their earlier, cruder models, not suitable for running on Dublo track. As you can see here, this model came fitted with what looks like a standard Dublo centre rail pickup assembly. But although it's a standard assembly, it's been fitted in a very non-standard way, very far back in the chassis. Well, there wasn't room for it anywhere else, really. And it's connected by a wire coming down and soldered to the side, whereas in normal Dublo mounting it would be connected via the centre retention screw. I noticed that the model was missing steps on the right side of the cab. Here are the corresponding steps on the left side. Those are big steps. I did consider what I might do about replacing the missing steps, but I didn't really have an obvious solution. Spare steps from old loco bodies were generally too small, as at top left here. The steps on the tender from a mainline Jubilee at right here were fairly close, but I didn't really want to cut up that perfectly good tender to steal its steps. I may revisit the step repair issue in the future, but I think I'll actually have to fabricate something myself. When I initially tried the model with my bench power supply, I got no response from it at all. So I guess it would have initially been classed as a non-runner. I undid the screw holding on the front bogie and removed that bogie. Apparently the body retention screw needed to be removed from the top. And here is the body retention screw in front of the smoke box. With that screw removed, I was able to pull the front of the chassis out of the body. The fit was tight, but with some wiggling, I was able to get the chassis out of the body, and here it is, fitted with an XO4 type motor. There were some very odd pickups at the back of the chassis, pressing on the outside of the rear driving wheels. However, I'm not sure if those pickups are even necessary, as power from the wheels is being passed through the chassis, with the power from the centre rail pickups routed to the insulated brush of the XO4. Here you can see the XO4 motor. The brush on the near side has a non-insulated spring retaining it, and so is electrically connected to the chassis itself. The brush on the other side has an insulating sleeve on its spring and is connected to the red wire, which is connected to the green wire, which in turn goes down to the centre rail pickups. By applying power directly to the brushes, I was able to get a slight twitch out of the motor, but that was all. I couldn't get the motor to actually turn over and turn the wheels. The XO4 motor was held in place by a screw at the rear, as is normal. With that screw removed, I was able to lift the motor away from the chassis. The connector for the wire from the centre rail pickups was dirty and corroded, probably one of the major causes of the failure to run. I was able to get the motor spinning by applying power to the brushes of the detached motor, although the motor didn't appear to be in very good condition. The brushes were in pretty awful condition. One of them especially seemed to have been running right off the end of the commutator. It might have been better to bin those brushes and fit replacements, but this type of brush aren't the easiest thing for me to get here in Canada, so I tried to fix the original brushes up with a bit of a file. I got out some T-cut to clean the commutator, which was quite filthy. I put some oil into the reservoirs by the front and back motor bearings. There was really too much play in the motor shaft. On the other hand, the magnet seemed quite strong. The motor did run quite a bit better after being cleaned up and lubricated. I checked electrical continuity to see if pickup should work. There was continuity between the driving wheels and the chassis, and between the centre rail pickups and the end of the red wire. The connector on the end of the red wire was very corroded. I did my best to clean up that connector with contact cleaner. I cleaned the wheels with a bronze brush in a rotary tool. The driving wheels seemed quite unwilling to turn freely, even after I lubricated the axles and the crank pins. There was probably old, gummed-up lubricant on the axles. I scooched the whole chassis out thoroughly with contact cleaner to remove the old lubricant. This worked quite well, and finally the wheels turned freely. I let the contact cleaner evaporate off and then lubricated again. I refitted the motor, doing up the rear retaining screw. I reconnected the connector on the end of the red wire between the insulating sleeve and the brush, and tried the model with power to the wheels and the centre rail pickups. It worked okay. The chassis seemed to be running pretty well now, with power applied to the chassis and the centre rail pickups. I got the bare chassis onto my 3-rail tabletop for a little running test.
So here's the chassis of this 2P440 on my 2-rail tracks. Initially it declined to run at all, other than a slight twitch of the motor, but you know, it had various problems, and the motor's not great even now, but we'll see what we can do. 60%, I'll give it a bit more, 65. Considering it has like probably Romford wheels or something on it, I'm a bit surprised that it clunks so badly as it goes over the Dublo points, but there you go. Let me see, does it like going backwards? Doesn't seem to care, does it? Seems pretty much about as ready to go backwards as forwards. Of course, that's actually lower, that's 55% power. Okay, making a bit of a smell, but then again, I know this motor's not great. There's a certain amount of play in the shaft, and the brushes are not in great shape. But for now, it does run.
Since the chassis appeared to be running okay now, I got the chassis back into the body. It was a tight fit. The chassis would only fit into the body if the wires were tucked into grooves in the side of the chassis block. Having fitted body and chassis together, I tested electrically again, as it's not uncommon for fitting the body to stop a chassis working, especially if the fit is tight. The two parts seen here fell out of the body during my work, a sort of cut-down metal washer and a little rubber washer or grommet. I couldn't figure out what they were supposed to do, and they didn't seem essential, so I went ahead leaving these parts out. I refitted the front bogie to the chassis and tried electrically once more to confirm that things were still working okay. This is a very heavy model, especially the Loco, showing an all-up weight of over 500 grams here on my digital scale, making it over a pound in weight. I got the model with its tender onto my 3-rail tracks for some running.
Okay, let me see if I can show this 2P 3-rail Kit-Built model actually running with all of its bits. Try. It's a little hesitant here and there over points and anywhere there's a little bit of dirt on the track, but for some reason that tunnel's a constant problem. I don't know why. The track seems to get dirtier under the tunnel than anywhere else. See what I mean? It's hesitating as it goes under that tunnel, but not bad really. And honestly, it's a handsome looking model. You can't really see it that well there, but it's a nice looking model. Let's see if we can put a couple of coaches behind it. Okay, let me see what success I have trying to run this Midland 2P with a couple of Dublo articulated coaches, such as they are. I know them. They're not really original Dublo articulated coaches, as someone pointed out. They only really made them with LNER, but I don't run LNER, so these suit me better. You have to be careful with that tunnel. If it gets a little bit off center, coaches or even longer locos will hit it. Anyway, so there you go. We seem to be running not badly, and as I say, I'm quite impressed with how handsome this Kit-Built model is. Someone did a very good job of it. What I should probably do is put a coal load in the tender, which it did not come with.
This was how the tender came, and I thought that I really should add a coal load to it. I cut a piece of sponge to fit into the bottom of the tender coal bunker. I painted that sponge with flat black acrylic. Some of the blue sponge is still visible, but hopefully the coal will hide that. I spooned coal on top of the sponge. Then I wetted the coal with running alcohol from a pipette and soaked the coal in watered-down white glue. And here's that coal load after the glue dried. I got the model back onto the tracks for a little more running as a train.
Alright, let me just see if I can finish with one more run of this. And the clock's chiming. They do tend to get rather spread out, the antique clocks. A bunch of them had already chimed, but although I try to set them each morning back level with each other, they wander off, I'm afraid. I'm getting rather hesitant running over the points there, but we try. A lot better than when I started. Wouldn't run at all when I started. It's a pity it staggers a bit as it goes over the points where it's not quite picking up 100%. Very nice looking model this is. I'm quite impressed by whoever built it. Really, that's all we can do, I think. Famous last words. And I think I've got it stuck on a point, but I was trying to stop it there.